Hey guys, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to brief you on the most consequential geopolitical developments on the past 24 hours and the ripple effect across the global economy, European security and Central Asia trade corridors. I will proceed in the 5 parts. First, the 2 headline events. Second, the war in Ukraine, where there might be heating and on what timeline. Third, Russia's fiscal position and the capacity of finance of war. Fourth, the current macro picture in Ukraine. Fourth, the current macro picture in Ukraine. And finally, that all of this means for Kyrgyz exporters engaging to the Russian market in 2025-2026. So, it's just the forecasts and the view on the situation. Two headline events last 24 hours is first, Washington reports of high stakes pressure on Kyiv during the tense meeting in the U.S. capital. The message, in a sense, is to contemplate concessions to Moscow, especially acquiescing to a ceasefire along current lines of control in Donbass under the framework of security guarantees to both sides. The author reportedly excludes the transfer of Tomahawk missiles and stress the speed end of war quickly. In such proposal, to gain traction would refrain the battlefield and the diplomacy around it, harden debates within NATO, and heighten questions about the durability of Western unity. Second, Beijing, Washington, and escalation in the trade on confrontation centered on fentanyl control, soy trade, leverage, and the critically rare earths. The United States is signaling record-level tariffs up to 157%, absent concessions, while China is tightening export restrictions on rare earth elements. This combination hits sensitive nodes in Western supply chains, defense electronics, electric vehicles, advanced magnets, and raises a prospect of a shock of European and American manufacturing at a moment of already elevated inflation expectation and fragile growth. The true line is clear. Industrial policy, national security, and trade correction are now fully intertwined. Ukraine war, timelines, and plausible endpoints. It's impossible to timestamp to end of war. It's possible, however, to map the plausible plans. Today, the 3 scenarios dominate expert assessments. Scenario A, ceasefire or talks in 2025 under intensified external pressure. The second, U.S. administration pressuring Kyiv to consider territorial compromises. Donbass and Crimea foremost a convincible pathway to a cessation of active hostiles by late 2025. The trade-off would likely be frozen lines, limited reintegration prospects, and some architecture of guarantees that leaves both militaries forward deployed and alert. Scenario B, protracted conflicts in 2026 and beyond. Multiply strategic studies center fear the highest probability of long war. Russia can continue to mobilize manpower and materials even at deteriorating marginal cost. Ukraine adapts to industrial scale war. Learn to fight an attritional campaign and release of Western finance and arrangements and good enough cadence in this scenario. The front lines inch, not sprints. The political calendar in Western capitals sanctions fatigue and ammunition production rare become decisive variables. Prediction markets reflect this uncertainty. Low odds in 2025, settlement higher by 2026, and persistent risk of periodic escalation even amid frozen conditions. Scenario C, escalation of systems shock. This is the thin tail, high impact case, a border incident involving NATO territory, a supply chain shock that triggers a broader macro downturn of significant change in political within key donor states. None of whether the base case today, but any could act as a forcing function toward either a premature, fragile settlement on a wider conflagration. The meta conclusion across most independent assessments is sobering: a total victory for every side of the classic sense. Imparable to horizons we can analyze the confidence. More likely it's negotiated stasis and armistice without peace arriving only when battlefield, momentum, fiscal constraints and political incentives align. Third, Russian fiscal position and war financing capacity. So what we can see, turning to the Russia's books. The headline of Paradox: high wartime outlays financed by a mix resilient revenues, aggressive taxation and reserves management, yet mounting structural strain. For the first 9 months in 2025, federal revenues amounted to roughly 26.9 trillion rubles, or which 6.6 trillion were oil and gas receipts and 20.3 trillion were non-oil revenues, so all in rubles. Expenditures over the same period were approximately 30.7 trillion, implying a deficit near 3.8 trillion rubles. Year-to-date and full-year deficit on the order of 5.7 trillion rubles. The spending structure is increasingly militarized, and with defense and security together consuming an exceptionally high share of the federal budget. As for the buffers, the National Wealth Fund, NWF, it's a Russian fund, stood at about 13.2 trillion rubles as of October 1st, 2025, with liquid components near 4.2 trillion rubles. Liquid assets are the oxygen for short-term financing, but the numbers suggest oxygen is still flowing, but the room is getting stuffy. What does this mean to endurance? At the current burn rates, defense spending of the order of the mid-tens trillions of rubles, a multi-trillion deficit, and policy rate headwinds around the high teens to 20%. Russia can likely sustain the present intensity for another 2 or 3 years, 2 to 3 years, particularly if oil prices remain supportive and tax measures fighting further. Beyond that, the trade-offs darken: higher inflation pressures, slower potential growth, capital depending shortfalls in the civilian economy, and greater political cost of guns over better budgeting. In short, findable truth 2027, 2028, but at an increasing price and long run welfare and stability. Ukraine across resilience under the fire. Despite the devastation, Ukraine remains a macro functioning for 2025. Growth and still positive, but decelerating around 2% for the year after a stronger 2024. War taxes every artery of economy, energy, infrastructure repeatedly degraded. Logistics are costly and risky, and the labor market is tied to out-migration and mobilization. Inflation is elevated, low double digits on the fiscal deficit was commonly framed at 20-25% of GDP, underwriting by external partners. 3 million people run out from the Ukraine. To stabilize, stand out. First, international reserves near 46.5 billion provide a meaningful cushion for currency stability and external obligations. Second, the economy is adapting. IT services remain globally competitive. Agricultural continues to export under the ad hoc corridor arrangements under the fire. And the private capital is gradually carefully testing small-scale build projects. The country's reconstructions bill, roughly $500 billion over the decade, is doubting, but it's also a blueprint for investment, or if security conditions improve and EU integration continues to advance. The forward look is confidential with the sustained support and fewer energy shocks. 2026 could see 3-4% growth in support falters, and with structural losses depend growth could slip below 1%. Fiscal anchors, electricity, reliability, and predictable security assistance are the three levers of watch. What this means to, for example, Central Asia and to the Kyrgyz exporters to Russia 2025-2026. Finally, to Bishkek, most practical question: how should exporters think about the Russian market over the next 18 months? The picture is mixed: opportunity and risk equal measure. For Kyrgyz Republic is very useful if Russia in the peace, then Kyrgyz exporters can buy more goods for the Russia. All we producing, all textile, all things, all goods we exporting to Russia, Kazakhstan and the neighbors. But couldn't, of course, enter to the market of China. But we have here the hard time where war begun by Russia. It's hitting our business, and we interested in strong but peaceful Russia, and we interested in the strong Russia anyway, because for our country we have no another neighbors such big and such grown. Trade gravity still favors Russia within the EU, Eurasian Economical Union. Russia remains the dominant partner for Kyrgyzstan, and despite macro headwinds, Russian demands for consumer goods, apparel, foodstuff, and selected machinery input persist. Certain categories of re-export electronics and auto parts remain viable. The complaints are low, and there is a space for a second stage processing place, adding value to imported intermediates before onward sale. Investment pool: Russian capital is likely to continue seeking regional outlets that helps diversity supply chains under sanction constraints. Well-governed joint ventures in logistics, light manufacturing, and energy adjacent services can find traction, particularly in the line with import substitution priorities of the Russian side. On the risk side, the policy volatility. Cruise domestic exports bans for scrap metal, live animals, and other categories have already been contributing to a notable fall in headline exports. Firms need compliance, muscle, and contingency sourcing to avoid being stranded by abrupt prohibitions. Sanctions, drug and compliance friction. The expanding perimeters of Western restrictions, increased banking friction, due diligence burdens, and the risk of sudden route closures. Anything that smells like sanctions invasion via re-export raises exposure. But a clean paper trail, implement end-use screening and diversity payment channels that remains within the law. Logistics and cost shocks. Freight demand is up while capacity is nevertheless, and rising transport costs are now a structural feature. Budget for longer cash conversion cycles and use construction buffer delivery without windows. Price adjustment clauses to avoid margin wipeouts. That then is an actionable playbook. For example, for Kyrgyz Republic, diversity but don't abandon. Keep Russia as a core market. You have a product market fit, but actively see demand in Kazakhstan and Gulf to hedge single market risks. Move up to the value chain wherever possible. Pivot from the pure re-export to light assembly or finishing in Kyrgyzstan. This project protects margins, justifies pricing power, and strengthens the local value-add narrative with regulation and lenders. Institutionalize compliance, treat sanctions and export control compliance as a capability for a checkbox. Maintain adjustable, auditable documentations, invest in training and centralized counterpart screening. Local in logistics, secure medium terms contract with the two independent freight partners, and model inventory buffers to ride 30-60 day disruption without stock outs. Price for volatility. Use tiered price lists and FX linked clauses with Russian buyers. Protect gross margin first. Volume without margin will not survive today's shocks. Finance prudently. Anticipate longer working capital cycles. Negotiate factoring and supply chain financing. The available avoid single bank concentration. Let me close and concise takeaways. First, geopolitics is no industrial policy for the, by our means, the US-China tariff standoff and the pressure campaign on Ukraine are not isolated headlines. They are architecture of more transactional, security-centric global economy. Second, both Russia and Ukraine can continue fighting, neither can do so forever without mounting costs. Russia's fiscal stamina is real but finite. Ukraine's resilience is impressive but contingent of external lifelines and energy stability. A negotiated pause is plausible in the next 12-24 months, but not guaranteed. War will continue a couple years, maybe 1 year, maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years. In my first forecast in 2022, I predicted 4 years of war. In the one of option 6 years of war, and very long timeline of war is 8 years. So I think in the 8 years all sides will tight very strongly and they will stop because no resources, no ways to continue. Third, for Kyrgyz businesses, the era of passive arbitrage is over. The winners will be those who professionalize compliance and visible value to design resilience into logistics and finance. Opportunity exists, but it must be earned with discipline. So thank you for watching. I am making my first steps in the English language to YouTube. I am Iskender Sharshev, economist and political scientist in the Kyrgyz Republic in the Central Asia, and I am observing the world from another side of globe. You know, it's my point is to see what's happening in the world, what's happening in the US from the another side of the globe. In the surrounded by the countries which is a global south, which market as a global south, as a ideological opponents of the United States. But I am a neutral, but of course with the individual specific. If you're interested in this, push the subscribe to my channel and push the ring bell. See ya next video.
The clock is ticking, fast tick-tock. The world won't wait, the stories rock. Breaking news, it's time to talk. From the streets to the sky to the waves that crash, we bring the truth with